Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I've lost count of how many times I've held my breath, praying this recorder would still power on. Sometimes it feels like it's my only tether to the world we used to know. A tiny machine preserving echoes of who we were. I picked it up at a dusty electronics store that had been stripped to its bones, nabbing a handheld charger on the off chance it might keep my time capsule alive. So far, it's done the trick. But every click of the record button makes my heart skip, because honestly, if this device goes silent, I'm not sure what else I'll have left. I'm still a reporter. At least, that's what I tell myself, even though there's no studio, no editor, and no audience anymore. The truth is, I can't shake the feeling that someday, someone might come across these tapes. Maybe future survivors. Or maybe someone who wanders in long after this is all over. They deserve to know how it happened. How everything we once took for granted came crashing down in barely a month. We all saw the news at first. Polished anchors told us to remain calm, to stay indoors, to trust that help was on the way. They spoke with reassuring voices, but I think they were just as scared as the rest of us, reading bulletins that changed by the hour. The final few broadcasts sounded desperate, begging viewers to evacuate or find designated safe zones. Then they stopped. Just like that, we were on our own. Today, I arrived at a place that was supposed to be one of those safe zones. A quarantine camp set up at a large high school. I found a tattered flyer taped to a streetlight a few miles back, promising refuge and medical aid. Must have been posted during those early days, when the government still had resources and people still believed in official instructions. The sight of it gave me a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd stumble across a functioning camp for once. What I'm looking at now is more like a graveyard of abandoned dreams. Rows of rusted cars fill the parking lot, their windows smashed, their doors thrown open in a frantic rush. A few makeshift barricades, cafeteria tables, metal chairs, heaps of sandbags lie scattered around in disarray. Torn tents flap in the breeze, as if still clinging to the promise that this was meant to be a haven for the uninfected. The sky looms overhead, heavy and overcast, painting everything in a dreary half-light that makes the scene feel even more surreal. It's midday, but the sun is struggling to pierce the thick clouds hanging low like a shroud. A gentle wind rustles through the few remaining trees by the fence line, and I wonder how many people sought shelter behind these walls, praying for an organized response that never arrived. Now, with no voices and no bustling movement, the place looks hollowed out, as though the very life it once held has been snuffed out. I don't know if there's anyone still here, but I'm going in. Maybe I'll find answers. About the camp, about the outbreak, about why we couldn't hold everything together. Or maybe I'll find nothing at all. Either way, my recorder is rolling. Someone somewhere has to bear witness to how it ended. But the air smells stale and faintly sour, like old trash bins left to bake in the sun. There's no sign of any active defenses. No voices, no hum of generators, no passing helicopters overhead. Only the wind gusting through broken windows. I can see banners still fluttering from tall poles. "Stay strong," they proclaim in big red letters. It's surreal to think that someone printed those banners less than a month ago, hoping to reassure people. The main entrance to the school is wide open, its glass doors stuck at odd angles. Inside, the hallways are dark except for what light manages to slip through the broken windows. Stray debris litters the floor. Blankets, half-eaten food wrappers, spent flashlights. It's like everyone here left in a hurry, or they never left at all but vanished. I'm talking softly because I'm trying not to attract attention. If the infected are still around, they might be lurking in the shadows. But that's not the only reason. The silence here feels thick. Even my own footsteps echo so loudly that I have to force myself to keep moving. My heart rate picks up the moment I turn a corner and see the improvised medical station. Tables are pushed together in a semicircle, covered in scattered notes, medical supply boxes, half-empty IV bags, and a single upright lamp. The overhead lights are dead, so the entire area is dimly illuminated by daylight coming from a window set high in the wall. That's when I hear a faint rustling sound. I freeze, listening. It's not coming from behind me or from the halls. It's coming from one of the classrooms. A sign on the door reads, "Chemistry Lab." I approach as quietly as I can, stepping over a toppled metal chair. Then I hear a voice, a tired, raspy whisper that's reciting something under its breath. I peek through the window in the door. A figure is crouched by a desk, rummaging through boxes. The figure turns slightly, revealing a face lit by the pale glow of a small LED lantern. A woman, hair pulled back into a ponytail that has mostly come undone. She's wearing a rumpled lab coat. Before I can say anything, a floorboard creaks under my boot. The woman snaps her head up, and I find myself staring right into her eyes. "Who's there?" she calls, her voice low but steady. I'm not here to hurt you," I reply, pushing the door open with my foot. "My name's Riley Hart. I'm just documenting what I see." She regards me carefully, a combination of hope and caution on her features. After a moment, she sets the box aside and stands up, wiping her hands on her coat. "Documenting, huh? Is that what that recorder's for?" She gestures to the handheld device in my grip. I nod. "Yeah, I used to be a reporter. I guess I still am in a way." I step forward slowly, making sure she can see I'm unarmed except for a small pocket knife at my belt. She doesn't seem threatened, though. If anything, she looks exhausted. She looks me over, her expression wary, but not hostile. A trace of curiosity flashes across her features when she notices the recorder in my hand, the microphone aimed in her direction. Her shoulders relax slightly, as though she's decided I'm not here to harm her. Encouraged, I lift the device, drawing a calming breath before pressing the record button. "Tape 3, I say softly into the microphone. "I've just encountered someone who seems to be the only person left in what was once a quarantine camp. Miss, can you tell me your name?" She lifts her head, takes a breath. "Dr. Elena Vasquez. I was with the CDC, assigned here when we first set up the perimeter." I glance around at the disordered supplies. "What happened here?" I ask. She looks down as though searching for the right words. "Have you been to any of the other camps?" I shake my head. "Well," she continues, "they all ended up the same way from what I've been told. In the beginning we thought we could isolate the infected, maybe find a treatment. We had supply convoys, security teams. For a few days it almost seemed like we were in control." Her voice trembles slightly, and she steps forward, gesturing for me to follow her into the chemistry lab. Rows of counters with old Bunsen burners line the walls, and the place smells like disinfectant. She stops beside a stack of folders. "But it wasn't the infected that destroyed us," she says, her gaze drifting across the chaotic scene. "It was everything else. Fear, food shortages, the breakdown of communication. People started turning on each other. We had arguments over resource distribution, over quarantine protocols. Some folks even claimed the outbreak wasn't real at all, that it was some conspiracy. Then the electricity went out for good." She picks up a file from the top of the stack, flipping through pages that look like daily reports. We tried to keep track of who was sick, who wasn't, but the panic just kept growing. Soldiers abandoned their posts when they got word that their families were in trouble. The rest of us tried to keep everything going, cooking, cleaning, comforting the families that showed up. Before we knew it, we didn't have enough hands for the work that needed doing. Dr. Vasquez rubs her temples. I can see the toll it's taken on her, physically and emotionally. Then the infected finally breached the outer fences. It wasn't even that many, not at first, but we didn't have the manpower or the will to push them back. People went from trying to help each other to fighting over scraps of food. It became chaos. She drops the file on the counter, her voice trembling again. I got separated from the others, barricaded myself in here with as many supplies as I could carry. I don't even know if anyone else made it out. I run my fingers over the battered pages of the file. Faint scribbles detail patient names and conditions, dates of arrival, quarantine status. It feels strange to see real, official documents describing something I've only witnessed firsthand in the streets. People transformed into something empty, something that only knows hunger. You mentioned trying to find a treatment, I say. Is there any hope? Dr. Vasquez's posture stiffens. She sighs, reaching into one of the boxes. She lifts out a small sealed vial. We experimented with antiviral cocktails, even considered advanced treatments, but everything was theoretical. We never had the chance to run proper trials. We needed more time, more resources, more cooperation. She sets the vial down gently like it's the only thing left that matters to her. The infection spread through bodily fluids, bites, scratches, even contact with open wounds. We tried quarantining the infected, but it was already too late. The virus was out of control. It mutated quickly. Her eyes shift to the hallway beyond, as if expecting someone to come back any moment. In the end, the real threat wasn't the infected themselves, but how people reacted. Panic, denial, violence. All of it spiraled into a meltdown. This camp could have been our chance to make a stand. Instead, it became a pit of despair. We walk together to the classroom door. She points toward the hallway where a few bullet holes scar the plaster walls. That happened during a riot, she explains quietly. We had limited supplies, so we tried to ration them. Some people believed we were stockpiling for ourselves. Others refused to believe the infection was real, said the quarantine measures were just a trick. Fights broke out, shots were fired. And then, she doesn't finish the thought, but I can guess. People fled, the infected came, the camp fell. I can't imagine how terrifying it must have been, I say, keeping my voice low. It was, she admits. But there were moments of kindness too. A few of the soldiers stayed behind, tried to protect the civilians. Nurses worked around the clock in the cafeteria turned infirmary. Neighbors shared what little food they had left. We did our best. She closes her eyes for a moment, but it wasn't enough. I pause the recording briefly to let her gather herself. The last thing I want is to make this conversation any harder for her. But she gestures for me to continue. Someone needs to hear this, she insists. If you're really documenting everything, then let them know the truth. Let them know what fear does to us. Click. I resume the recording. Dr. Vasquez, I say gently. If there's one message you'd want survivors to hear, what would it be? She runs a hand through her messy hair, eyes weary but resolute. That the only real chance we had was sticking together. We lost our best shot at survival when we turned on each other. If there's anyone else out there, I hope they'll learn from that mistake. Her words settle in the air like a quiet echo. We decide to look around the rest of the building while it's still daylight. Dr. Vasquez doesn't seem frightened about running into the infected. She claims she cleared the nearby holes as best she could, using what little she had. A handful of lab chemicals turned into rudimentary repellents. We pass by the cafeteria. Tables are overturned. Trays and wrappers lie scattered on the floor. Dried stains mar the tile. There's a faint odor in the air, one I can't quite place. Stale plastic and something chemical. I keep a tight grip on my pocket knife, even though I suspect it won't be much help if anything comes rushing out from behind the counters. We tried to feed people here, Dr. Vasquez explains, gesturing at the overturned tables. We had lines of folks waiting for basic rations. Then the shipments got cut off. She stops by a blackboard where the remnants of a schedule remain. Times for morning checkups, lunch distribution, volunteer sign-ups. We had so many volunteers, she continues. They truly believed we could save each other. But once the food shipments failed and the infected got closer, everyone's faith unraveled. I glance at a tacked-up poster near the board that reads, "If you feel sick, report immediately to the medical station." It's torn, half hanging off. The idea that once upon a time, everyone here thought they could manage this crisis is heartbreaking. We step through a corridor of abandoned classrooms. Each door stands open, revealing empty desks and stray papers on the floor. Outside, the sun is beginning to set behind thick clouds, painting the hallways in dull orange light. Dr. Vasquez gestures for me to wait while she checks one of the rooms for any leftover supplies. I stay in the hallway, leaning against the lockers with my recorder in hand. Tape 3, continuing documentation, I whisper. I'm inside what was once a functioning quarantine camp. Dr. Vasquez, a CDC official, is the sole remaining occupant. According to her, the collapse happened quickly, not just because of the infected, but because of humanity's inability to stay united. I'm seeing evidence of that everywhere. Maybe there's a lesson in this. A door behind me groans. My heart skips a beat as I spin around. It's only the breeze from a broken window, pushing the door gently against its frame. Still, my pulse pounds in my ears. I wait until Dr. Vasquez returns, a small bundle of medical supplies in her arms. Found a few bandages and disinfectant, she murmurs. Might come in handy. As we explore further, we come across a locker room that was converted into a makeshift storage space. Rows of steel lockers stand with their doors ajar, revealing piles of clothes, blankets, and a few meager personal possessions. She points to a corner where a small generator sits, silent and clearly out of fuel. We tried to keep the lights on, but gasoline quickly became scarce, same with fresh water. We ended up rationing that too, which didn't make us very popular. There's a chart pinned to the wall documenting the camp's population over time. A neat line graph shows a sharp rise in arrivals during the outbreak's first week. Then, just as abruptly, the line descends into a steep drop. Names and numbers are scribbled, some crossed out with red ink. I run my finger across the chart, noticing the final entry. Day 12, 94 people accounted for. 94, I mutter. That was... By the next day, half of them were gone. Dr. Vasquez finishes for me. Ran away, or worse. I don't ask for details, I can guess. We gather a few more supplies from the storeroom. Canned goods, a flashlight, anything that still seems usable. Dr. Vasquez insists I take what I need. I can't carry it all anyway, she says, her voice flat. And I can't stay here much longer. The infected may have moved on, but that doesn't mean they're gone for good. Besides, I've done all I can in this place. For a fleeting moment, I consider asking her to come with me, but she's already glancing toward the exit, as though imagining the road ahead. Where will you go? I finally ask. There's a rumor, she replies, about another camp, maybe in the next county. I don't know if it's real, but if it is, they'll need a doctor. I look around at the gutted shell of what was once a thriving relief effort, a place meant to keep people safe. Now it's a haunted reminder of how quickly things can fall apart. Before leaving the school, Dr. Vasquez leads me to the auditorium. She flips on the small flashlight in her hand, illuminating rows of seats. At the front, the stage is piled with strewn sleeping bags, as though people tried to find refuge in the large open space. It's strange, she says, her voice echoing in the vast room. Even with the infected wandering around, folks sometimes congregated here at night. They'd share whatever scraps of comfort they had, music, stories, anything to feel human again. She steps up to the stage, shining her flashlight around. The beam catches on a half-burnt candle stuck into an old soda can. We even had a small vigil here, people praying, hoping for a miracle. There's a poignant sadness in her eyes. For a moment, I imagine all those families, children, grandparents, huddling in the dark while the outside world disintegrated. Did any of them survive? I ask quietly. She sighs. I don't know. Maybe some made it out before things got really bad. I'd like to believe that. We linger a moment longer, letting the silence fill the space. Then we turn to leave. Night is falling by the time we reach the school's main entrance again. Long shadows stretch across the parking lot, and a chill wind rustles the abandoned tents. Dr. Vasquez has a small backpack over one shoulder, filled with medical supplies and a few personal items. Thank you for sharing your story with me, I say, looking at her seriously. I'm trying to record everything, so that if someone finds these tapes one day, they'll know how it all happened. You're doing a service, she replies softly, one we never knew we'd need. I glance at the horizon, where the sky has deepened to navy blue. There's a ragged fence line far in the distance, collapsed in places. That must have been the perimeter where they attempted to keep the infected out. This is where I turn off, she says, pointing down the street. I'll be heading east to see if I can find that rumored camp. I nod, swallowing a knot of uncertainty. Good luck. She offers me a weary smile. You too. Keep that recorder safe, Riley Hart. People need the truth, even if it comes long after we're gone. And with that, she walks away, her footsteps fading into the darkness. I stand there, clinging to the last traces of daylight, the recorder still clutched in my hand. I also decided that it was time for me to move on. But before I could step aside, I heard a strange sound somewhere nearby, a soft whimper, almost lost in the wind. I look around, shining my flashlight across the empty lot. Near a toppled trash bin, I see movement. At first, I think it's just the wind rustling a piece of cloth. But then I spot a pair of alert eyes reflecting my beam. Cautiously, I step closer. It's a dog, thin and trembling, fur matted with dust. She looks up at me, ears pinned back. My heart goes out to her immediately. She seems frightened, just like every survivor I've met, human or otherwise. Easy there, I whisper, crouching low. I fish around in my backpack for something edible. All I have is a small pouch of beef jerky I've been saving, but it'll have to do. The dog sniffs the air warily, taking a tentative step forward. I toss a tiny piece of jerky onto the ground. She eyes me for a moment, then scuttles forward to sniff it. After a brief hesitation, she devours it, licking his lips. I hold out another piece in my open palm. Slowly, very slowly, she takes another step, then another, until she's close enough to grab it gently from my hand. It's like a silent agreement that we can trust each other. You need a place to go, buddy? I ask quietly, reaching out to scratch behind her ear. She flinches but doesn't run. I notice an old collar around her neck, the ID tag long gone. The only thing left is a metal ring and a few letters too faded to read. I recall a name I once heard someone shout at their dog, and it just feels right. I'm calling you Bailey, I say. How does that sound? Bailey doesn't protest, of course. She just looks up at me with those tired, sad eyes. I think we're both too exhausted for formalities. I decide to stick around the school for just one more night. My plan is to find a somewhat safe corner, away from the open doors and windows. With Bailey at my side, I set up a small spot in a classroom near the entrance. I push a heavy desk in front of the door, hoping that if anything, or anyone, tries to get in, I'll have a few extra seconds to react, maybe slip away if it comes to that. Outside, the wind picks up, making tattered tarps and tents flap in a ghostly rhythm against the battered school building. The sound is unsettling, but it's the only music we have now. I think of Dr. Vasquez heading east, her backpack filled with supplies and determination. I can't help but feel a twinge of envy, imagining there's a chance, however slim, that she'll find a place where people are still hanging on, where they trust each other enough to share resources instead of tearing each other down. I hope she finds it. Bailey settles next to me, pressing her body against my leg. I stroke her head gently, feeling wiry fur beneath my fingertips. A part of me wonders if he's been wandering these halls since everything fell apart, feeding off scraps and rummaging through overturned trash bins. Maybe she once belonged to someone who also came here looking for refuge. One thing's for sure, she seems grateful for any kindness I show her. I remember the moment Dr. Vasquez handed me those spare supplies, a couple of bandages, a small flashlight, some granola bars. She seemed genuinely relieved to pass them on, as if freeing herself from even that small burden. For her, maybe every ounce matters on the road ahead. For me, those supplies could mean the difference between living and not. I rummaged through my own backpack, checking the charging cord for my tape recorder. It's holding up for now, but I'm worried. If the charger breaks or if I can't find anywhere to power it, my entire archive could go silent. I make a mental note to check small shops and abandoned stores for a spare recorder with regular batteries. Batteries will be easier to find, easier to trade for. I'm convinced that, in a world where everything else is uncertain, recording the truth is something that must continue. I press the record button one more time, aiming the microphone at the rattling windows and the faint whistle of the wind outside. Tape 3, end of day. Riley Hart here, inside the remains of what was supposed to be a quarantine camp. I've interviewed Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the last remaining CDC officials in this area. According to her, the camp fell not only because of the infected, but because of our own inability to work together. In the face of fear, people fought among themselves, hoarded resources, and gave in to paranoia. Before she left, Dr. Vasquez gave me a few supplies. She's heading east, hoping to find another camp. I wish her well. I also met a new companion here, Bailey, a stray dog with soulful eyes. We're not alone anymore, at least for now. She may not speak, but it's good to have someone around, especially at night. If anyone ever listens to these tapes, I hope you'll learn from these mistakes. Fear is natural, but giving into it, hurting each other instead of helping, only makes the downfall come faster. For now, that's all I have to report. Riley Hart signing off, and to whoever's out there, stay safe. The recorder's small red light winks out, plunging the classroom into darkness. Outside, the last traces of twilight fade behind the horizon, and the school's interior seems to grow colder. Bailey circles twice before flopping onto the blanket I've laid out on the floor, resting her chin on my boot. Her warm presence against my leg is comforting, a simple reminder that not all living beings have lost their capacity to trust. I watch the shadows shift along the cracked walls. There's a tension in the air that never fully goes away, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Except now the storm could be anything from a roving pack of infected to a band of desperate survivors who'd do anything for a meal. My eyelids grow heavy, but I force myself to keep them open for just a moment longer, scanning the corners of the room one last time. In the distance, a muffled crash echoes through the deserted corridors, but it might be just the wind toppling something flimsy. My heart jumps in my chest, but Bailey barely stirs. Eventually, I realize I can't stay awake forever. If something's out there, I'll have to rely on my barricade and Bailey's sharp hearing to warn me. I glance at my recorder, lying beside me. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I'll see about searching the science labs or the nurse's office for spare batteries, or anything that might power my device. Maybe I'll even manage to rummage through an old supply closet for fresh tapes. The idea of the recorder failing still gnaws at me. I've poured everything into these tapes, hoping they'll be found by someone who needs to hear them. The night stretches on, and the school's hollow hallways seem to breathe with the wind. Bailey twitches in her sleep, paws scraping against the tile. I close my eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day wash over me. Morning will come, I remind myself. Another sunrise, another chance. And so, here I am. Riley Hart, a former reporter still chasing the story, determined to preserve the remnants of our history for whoever might come after us. We lost so much in such a short time, but I refuse to let the truth vanish into oblivion, lost in the chaos of a world undone. Eventually, my thoughts blur and drift as sleep takes hold, the recorder silent by my side. Outside the barricaded door, the wind continues its lonely song, carrying the echoes of a once hopeful camp that crumbled under fear and desperation. Yet amidst the wreckage, a single voice remains to chronicle the fall, mine. And perhaps that's enough to keep hope alive until the next dawn. No matter what happens tomorrow, I'll keep recording. Because someone someday should know the truth of how it all ended, and how even as the world unraveled, a few of us clung to the slim possibility that unity could still save us, if only we remember what it means to be human. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.